It was like 11 p.m. during COVID. I'm building a budget. The rest of the finance directors were yelling at me because I was consolidating it. The system wasn't working, so we had to manually put the presentation together. We had the presentation the next day and we weren't at target. So if you put all these X's beside it, it was a disaster. You don't necessarily get that credit that you're putting in all these hours of time. There's an unsung hero component to FP&A.
This week, we have a real treat for you. We have a guest that's been on the show before, Ron Monteiro. He just published his book, Love Mondays. You think most people you worked in finance and FP&A that you worked with were loving their Mondays?
No, it's all over the board. Our attitude has a huge impact on whether we love our job.
Do you feel like FP&A, for a career, a lot of people kind of get burned out there, that the hours are just often too demanding?
Never want to put FP&A in a negative light. When I went through it, it was messy.
Finance pros, this is the event you don't want to miss. The AFP FP&A Forum, March 17th to 19th in Austin, delivers sales-free insights from top finance leaders. With 18 plus expert-led sessions, you'll gain actionable strategies to drive your success. I'll be there. Join me and hundreds of our peers. Learn more at afponline.org. Hello, everyone. Welcome to FP&A Tomorrow, where we delve into the world of financial planning and analysis, examining its current state and future prospects. I'm your host, Paul Barnhurst, aka the FP&A Guy, and I'll be guiding you through the evolving landscape of FP&A. This week, we have a real treat for you. We have a guest that's been on the show before, Ron Monteiro. He is back this week to join me. He just published his book, Love Mondays. And we're going to discuss that and have a conversation about what it means to love Mondays. Did we love our Mondays in FP&A? Why he wrote the book and some other things. So really excited to have you on the show, Ron. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I'm super excited to be here.
Good. Well, why don't we start? I'd love to start with you just giving your background. I know people have heard some of that before, but tell a little bit about your story and also how you came to write the book.
Yeah, fantastic. So I grew up in Kenya. So I moved to Kenya from Kenya to Canada when I was a teenager. And the reason I share that is I had a ton of anxiety. I had lots of trouble with public speaking. So fast forward, did my accounting degree, started with an accounting job at Hitachi. It was a good foundational job. And then I actually spent 15 years at Kraft and spent much of my time in FP&A roles at the analyst, manager, and director level. And I really got to love FP&A. And the reason I loved FP&A is because I felt like I was in the business. I was involved. I could be the products that I was working on in the grocery store. So absolutely loved that career. I went on to be the VP of finance for a private beverage company. And then I also went back to FP&A roles at Campbell Soup and Kruger Products. And so absolutely loved my 20-year career, call it, in finance. And about 3 years ago, I decided to start my own business. And I wanted to teach storytelling. Again, back to I was very shy and I found a way to feel confident and be able to lead meetings with CEOs. So I wanted to share that journey. And that's where I started doing training courses. And that's where our paths intersected. And so for the last 3 years, you and I have done training sessions for people all over the world. It's amazing to see people in America all the way to Zimbabwe and in between. And I've always had this passion or this bucket list item to write a book. And I chose to write it on how do people find more joy in their lives? How do they find, whether it's an FP&A role, whether it's in a teacher, a Buddhist monk, whatever you are, how do we intentionally find more joy? Because I want people to love the work they do.
Got it. No, I appreciate that. I know you've tried to get me to write a book. Keep trying to tell me I need to write one. And I keep telling you, we'll get there. Give me time. Right? So why was it Love Mondays first? How did that, you said you always had it on your bucket list to write a book, but why was your first book? What was the kind of impetus behind that? Is there a story that?
You know what? Like I started doing this podcast, right? And I got inspiration from you. I started doing, amateur podcasts compared to your podcast, but it was I started interviewing people to say, how do they love what they are doing? I tried to find people who just really inspired me. And somehow the name became Love Mondays. Like I actually don't even know how I came up with that name. But for me, it signifies Monday's the start of the work week. So how do we love Monday and every other day? And then it naturally became, okay, I've interviewed 15, 20 people, including yourself. I kind of like that as a title of a book. And I just started working towards it. So it's not like it was some grand plan. It just kind of evolved into this one. And there's something about just Love Mondays that just people understand right away what you're talking about.
So let's talk FP&A for a minute. You think most of the people you worked in finance and FP&A that you worked with were loving their Mondays? What was your take of kind of as you look back over your career?
No, it's all over the board, right? Like I've met FP&A people who just love their job and that's all they wanted to do. And, they love Monday and every other day. I've also loved FP&A folks who were mailing it in. It's mail in Monday and mail it in Friday, and they didn't like it. And you going deeper into that question, our attitude has a huge impact on whether we love our jobs, whether it's a teacher, an FP&A person, whether it's an FP&A person in corporate, whether it's, an FP&A person who works with marketing or sales. I think that attitude plays a big part of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I have a follow-up question to that. But before you get there, you mentioned how, some people hate Monday and every other day, and some people love their job. I worked with a guy. Every Friday, he'd check out early. And every Monday, he'd show up late. And he would always go, yeah, Friday Tyler hates Monday Tyler. And so, kind of that, like, he'd drag you in and just like, why am I here? And it always kind of made me laugh. But at the same time, I was like, yeah, don't want to be that way. And so that was the first. And, second thing is you mentioned attitude. And we can control our attitude. We can't control what happens to us. But how much do you think loving a job is attitude versus, hey, you have to find the right fit for you? Like there's a right career or maybe a couple right careers. Kind of, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, I think they're both important. And I'd say attitude is, to me, if I was to put a number, it's at least 50% of the battle to say, am I bringing an attitude that, yes, I can enjoy my job, I can love my job, I can make an impact? The second half is really the environment you're in. So again, going back to my experience, my first job, Hitachi Data Systems, good company, but the accounting team was very much busy at month end, not busy during the middle of the month. And there wasn't any drive to get better. It was just like, here's how we do it. And I actually didn't like my job. Like I still had a pretty decent attitude. I learned a lot, but then I got stagnant. Whereas I went into the next role, which was Kraft. And, it was just a culture of, okay, let's learn more. Let's grow more. The leaders actually actively helped you get to places you couldn't get, like public speaking. So I think they're both important. Attitude, I honestly think you can if you have a bad attitude, even a fantastic culture, it's not enough to unlock potential. But if you have a great attitude in a great culture, to me, that's nirvana.
How much of a role does your boss play in all this? I mean, let's talk culture for a minute. A lot of people say you don't leave companies, you leave bosses. But at the same time, we join a career because that's something we're interested in. So what role does that play?
I think your boss, your manager plays a huge role. And at the same time, like I've been in many roles where, okay, my manager is not interested in developing me and they're busy with other stuff. And what I did in those circumstances, I didn't quit immediately. I said, okay, is there anyone else internally or externally I can use as a mentor, coach to help me? And so, yes, it was important. And I loved a lot of the roles where I had phenomenal bosses, but I've had many who would, especially once I got to the senior director level, CFO had no time for me. Like I had to figure out my own ways to develop. So yes, it's important, but I would say the culture of an organization to me is actually more important than your direct manager as you go up the ladder, right? I'd say more junior, like if you're an analyst or manager, like if you're very junior, I think it's very important to have a boss who invests time with you, spends time with you. But as you grow, there's many other ways to get that development.
I was going to challenge you, and then you said in later roles, and you elaborated on that. And I can agree with that. I think early on, manager is critical, especially right out of college. Those first couple roles, it can really help teach you as you're trying to get comfortable and realize that you can have mentors beyond your boss. But as you move up the ladder, for sure, you can get mentors elsewhere. Obviously, if you're in a toxic environment, that's a different story with the boss.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Different. There's bosses that take an interest in you and develop you, and those are huge for your career. And then there's the ones that it's just an unhealthy environment. They don't treat people well. And that environment doesn't matter if you're junior or senior. you generally just want to get out of that environment.
Yeah, Paul. And so you didn't ask me this question, but I'll ask myself. So one thing I've learned is if I was to rewind as back to Ron when he had hair and is an analyst,
Wait, you had hair? Do you have a picture?
I would actually invest a lot more time in networking and meeting people in the industry, because I did get to periods where I had a toxic environment or a toxic boss, but I felt stuck. So if I was to rewind, letter to my younger self, so to speak, I would actually invest in, okay, how do I build a foundation of people and a network where if I get into that situation, I feel like I can move to a better situation. Do you know what I mean?
I know 100% what you mean. I didn't build a network at all early in my career. It took me a year out of undergrad to find a career role. I mean, I did some banquet serving, some things to pay the bills, but it wasn't really a job that had anything to do with my degree. And it took me 6 months out of grad school. I've always kind of had a hard time finding those jobs and transitioning, and I'd never really built a network. Now, as I've started to, do this business, I've built a network and have opportunities to talk to people. And I feel like if I had to find a job today, had to get out of an environment for whatever reason that wasn't healthy, it would be much easier than any time in my career.
Yeah, and I'll tell a little story here where Paul and myself do a lot of training in different parts of the world. And so occasionally Paul will come to Toronto, Canada, my hometown. And when he comes here, every night somebody is taking him out for dinner and wants to get his expertise on FP&A. So again, it just speaks to, both of us didn't really have great networking skills, a great network early in our career. And now we invest a ton of time. And you just see that the hard work Paul's put in, of course, crossed 100,000 followers. People all around the world are looking for Paul because he adds a ton of value. So it takes work, right? And, I'd love to just get a little bit of recollections from you to say, okay, you love your Mondays. What was that process like to get here, right? Because at one point you were in a job which I don't think you were thrilled with. Like, what would you share to your listeners? I don't know if you've been asked this question on this podcast.
Yeah, I've talked a little bit about it. I think for me, I've always liked working with the business, that part of FP&A. The part that's always been hardest for me is either been, unhealthy environments or feeling like I got to work 24/7 with the stress of to meet others' needs, to meet others' demands. It feels different if I'm working long hours and it's my own business. I'm building my own thing. I enjoy that more. So I think for me, those were the parts that were always tough in FP&A. I still had a boss that one time said, and then we'll get back to the question. He commented that FP&A is kind of like investment banking for corporate finance, and that a lot of people get burned out and go elsewhere. Because budget season, all those things can be long hours. And I'd hit that point where I was unhappy, not the work. I had great relationships, a lot of people I liked. There was a lot of projects I worked, but it was an unhealthy environment, and they expected you to be on 24/7. So for me, it came down to, LinkedIn was a way to find a job, as I've shared before. And over time, I started to get enough opportunities as I built a following that I felt like I could turn it into a business. Never planned on starting a business. And then I just kind of went for it. I said, okay, I got enough runway that I can either work for a company and continue to work for somebody else or kind of control my own destiny. I'm like, there's really no more risk here. I could be laid off tomorrow. I got enough runway to last a while. Why not give it a try and learn? I'm sure I'll be able to find a job if it fails, because I'm focusing on network and building and talking to people and being kind of, out in the community about FP&A. And so I found, today I love it. There's a lot of exciting projects I have. Just like any job. Do I love every day? No. Are there times I'm like, okay, I want less hours? Yes. Are there things where I'm like, okay, I need to manage things better? Of course, that's just life. But, I love the conversations I get to have and love a lot of the things I do.
Fantastic.
So I'm curious. I want to get your take. I mean, do you feel like FP&A, for a career, a lot of people kind of get burned out there, that the hours are just often too demanding in the career? I know you have a story you share in your book a little bit about this toward the end of your FP&A career.
FP&A for me was a massive positive turning point. So I never want to put FP&A in a negative light. I went from, again, doing this accounting job, which I was crazy busy at month end, and then it's really boring, and I was clock watching the rest of the month, which that's another signal. If you're ever watching the clock, it's time to look at something different.
Yeah, been there. I know what you're talking about.
My opinion. Then I went to FP&A and it exposed me to a whole new world, right? working with marketing, working with sales, working with operations, being able to express myself better. So I think I owe so much to the brilliance of FP&A roles. But I remember when I was transitioning out of one of those roles, the person came in and said, "Hey, tell me what an average day in your life of FP&A is." And I literally laughed out loud. So I was, there is no average day in FP&A. And when you get through month end, you've got a lineup of marketing and sales and operations people waiting to talk to you. And then you got back to a forecast and you're putting in the long hours and you're up till midnight or maybe even later getting this together. And you might present a scenario and this president of marketing and sales don't like it and they throw it in the garbage and you don't necessarily get that credit that you're putting in all these hours and times. There's an unsung hero component to FP&A, which I think also toughens you. So as I reflect on it, I got to the point where I think it was like, I'm not sure if this is a story you were thinking about, but it was like 11 p.m. during COVID. I'm building a budget. The rest of the finance directors were yelling at me because I was consolidating it. The system wasn't working, so we had to manually put the presentation together. We had the presentation the next day and we weren't at target. So if you put all these X's beside it, it was a disaster, right? Anyway, long story short, we got to the meeting. We ended up pulling it together like most teams are able to do. Sacrifice my family time, sacrifice my personal time. And the meeting did not go exactly that well. Was it my fault? No. There's many combinations of things that led there. So I think for me, it's like that people expect FP&A and finance people to just put in those long hours and it just becomes normal, right? I remember another time where I was a director and my two analysts were in the office until midnight. I was trying to support them. We couldn't get something to tie. I was literally telling them, plug it because I'm done. I'm done. And so I always say, like, if your FP&A role or finance goal role gets to that point where you're just done, I think that's where the burnout happens. It's like, how do we draw those lines earlier in our career, right? And I think me and you've probably both made the same mistake. Like my wife always tells me, I missed a lot of my kids' early childhood, right? Like I missed events and things like that. And I had to do it for various reasons, but I also probably had a choice in there. So I think for me, again, back to our conversation, it's around taking more control, being more intentional with what we do and taking the beauty and brilliance of the FP&A role, but also saying there's another side to life and we can control it. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, I think so. And I agree with you. I still remember was lucky enough for about a year. I've had some FP&A roles where they weren't that demanding in the sense of a lot of late nights. I've had other times where it's been absolutely crazy. And I think when you're getting to do the job, especially when you're with the business, I love it. I love those parts. There's a lot of great parts of FP&A, and I have nothing but gratitude for the experiences I've had. But I agree with you. There's a certain level where you have to take control. And I can remember one time having that conversation. I had a boss that wanted something done, and I looked at him like, look, I'll get it done when I get home. I got a friend's wedding reception tonight. It's one of my best friends that I'm going. And he was like shocked that I said I was going. Like that was the culture. He expected me to just keep working because it was for the CEO the next morning. And he almost, told me I had to stay. And I'm like, okay, if this guy tells me I have to stay, I'm quitting.
Yes.
Like, and I may not have done that early in my career, but it was like, no, there's a line here and I'm not going to cross it. You have to find that balance of, what you're willing to do in the sense of how many hours, how many sacrifices you're willing to make. And it's personal for each of us. There's not a right answer to that. Kind of going back, we mentioned, a lot of people that work in FP&A and hopefully not many that are listening to this podcast, because I would hope most people that are listening to this podcast enjoy their work and they're listening to get better. But would love to get your thoughts when you talk Love Mondays. I know you mentioned a four-part framework. So if somebody's maybe struggling or, thinking this really isn't the ideal job for me, I'd rather be doing something else. What do you recommend? What's the kind of process you tell them to go through?
Yeah. And just the backstory is like when I went through it was messy, right? And I'm sure the same thing. It's not like I was like, here's my 4-step process I'm going to follow. I was not that like this is more rewinding and saying, how can I help others follow a certain path? So the first thing I always say is find your purpose, right? And again, that's a pretty nebulous topic, but there's a few frameworks in there. One is called Ikigai, which is the Japanese word. And it has 4 questions. What do you love to do? What does the world need? What are you good at? And what can you get paid for? Okay. So if you hit all four of those, you found what's called your ikigai, your reason to wake up, your reason to love Mondays.
Okay, let's
And
go
this is an,
for it again one more time. I just want to make sure.
yeah. So, and maybe I'll ask, let's do this live. So Paul, what do you love to do? And maybe put a little bit of a finance FP&A lens on it. What do you love to do?
Tired of sitting through sales pitches designed as professional development? Same here. That's why I'm heading to the AFP FP&A Forum March 17th to 19th in Austin, where it's all about real, actionable insights. We're talking about AI, process efficiency, strategic planning, finance communication, practical takeaways, no fluff. Just ideas you can actually use to drive results. I'll be there too, leading the session. Amp up your scenario planning with Gen AI. If that's a topic you're excited about, let's connect. Join finance professionals from across the map at the AFP FP&A Forum, where the only agenda is your success. Head to afponline.org and use code FP&A Guy 2025 for $200 off. See you in Austin. I love learning new formulas in Excel because I'm a nerd. I love teaching people, and I love business partnering, having those relationships with the business, especially when you're talking strategy and how to kind of grow and improve things.
Amazing. Okay. And what does the world need? Like think similar context.
One, there's lots of finance people that need to be better at Excel, that need to improve their skills. They could save themselves hours, Power Query, other things. I know you've seen that. You've seen people that save time from, training and things we've taught.
Yeah. And just a little bit of an interjection. In one of our latest training sessions, Paul actually had somebody blow their brains. Like, wow, that's going to save hours. Okay. So that's two questions. So what do you love? You talked about. What does the world need? We agree. Hey, they need it. What are you good at? Right. So are you good at Excel and teaching? And look, I'm just going to answer that for you because it's obvious. Yes, you are. Okay. So you've hit three of those quadrants. And then the last one is, what can you get paid for? We both got to pay our bills, etc.
I hope it's paying my bills. Otherwise I'm in trouble.
Yeah. Think about how brilliantly that fits into your equation to say how you do it. And I'm actually looking at the page I have it, and you can Google if you want. But if you love that you found your ikigai, if you found just, hey, what do you love and what are you good at? Maybe it's a passion. If you found what do you love and what the world needs, maybe it's a mission. But this kind of rounds out four different ways. So it's a very introspective way to sit down and just journal on it and journal on again and come back to it. It's not like, hey, like we're doing again, rewind for your case. But if, let's say you don't know, it's working through that. So that's one way. And what that helps, and Paul, I'm what it helps with is, even if a student calls me from the University of Toronto and says, hey, can you talk to me about a career? I would say yes, because it's in my purpose, right? So what that does, the first thing is purpose. What gives you joy? What do you want to do more of, right? So that's step one. Step two is, okay, then how do you build a bridge? Let's say it's very different than what you're currently doing. What's the bridge to get there? For me, it was doing some free training sessions for organizations, right? Me and you met at a webinar where we were speaking for free, right? Neither of us were getting paid, but that's building the muscles, right? Crossing the bridge, getting to think about, like, when we first started 3-4 years ago, it felt hard to start our businesses, right? Like, it didn't feel real, right? I didn't feel like I had the confidence. So it's like, what are those little things you can do to build a bridge to your next phase? And again, I always say, look, you were working full time when you were building your bridge. I was doing the same. So we're not saying go quit and stuff like that. It's like, what are the little things you can do every day? Learn a new formula in Excel every day. For me, you see all the books behind me. I read a lot to build my confidence. So that's step two. And then when you feel you're in this stage where, okay, I've got this, I feel like I can run my business, I've got enough potential clients, the next step is burn the boats, meaning you're going all in, right? So maybe tell us your all in moment. When did you figure out, here's when I'm ready to quit my job and I think I can make it my own? What was that like for you?
So my journey was kind of happened over a couple months, but really there were a few things that I'd say are kind of turning points. first started to build a following, really found I enjoyed some of the things I was doing, going, maybe I could turn this into a business at some point. Then there were probably 3 or 4 turning points. First, somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I want to do a sponsored collaboration on LinkedIn. I think they offered me $150. Like, woo, pay the bills. No. And so I said, yes. And then someone else reached out to me and said, look, I know a company that's looking for about 15 hours of work. I can do that on the side. My job was only really being 40 hours a week at the time. And so I was like, okay, I can do that. And it was a part-time gig. Then you reached out to me and said, hey, I need someone to help do an Excel course. Well, I could put that together. And then I'd say the kind of final turning point, I believe it was in December of 21, 3 different companies in 1 week reached out to me. 2 of them asked me to apply for a role, and the third one talked about doing a big collaboration. And so at this point, I went to my wife and I'm like, I think I can turn this into a business. She kind of looked at me like I was crazy because I hadn't really I hadn't earned any money at this point. And so we talked about it for about 6 weeks. And then one day in February, she goes, I'm good. If you want to start your business, go ahead. I go, are you sure? Because I'm going to put in my notice this morning. I put in my notice that day. Didn't leave the company full time for about 4 months. I stayed with them on kind of a combination of full and part time, and then started my own business. And that was June of 2022.
Yeah, and where that's burn the bolts, stems from is they would say in olden times, like when you'd land on an island or on land, you would literally burn your bolts, meaning there's no going back. So
Yeah.
that's the whole thing to saying, I love your story, to say, hey, you built over time and you say, okay, when am I confident I can do it? And so that's an important step. And it's not just about burning your boats to start a business like I did. It could be, hey, I'm going to move from one company to another. I love FP&A, but I have a toxic bot, like we talked about. It could be like I'm in accounting and I want to move to FP&A. Whatever your version of that. I even have somebody who was a marketing director at a company. She's now selling journals and she's teaching yoga. There's tweaks, but there's also wholesale changes. We're talking about whatever your listeners thinking. Maybe I want to get just a couple % more happier, and I have an interest in something in the company. Go ask for it, right? So it doesn't have to be like extreme like the two of us. Could just be a tweak,
Well,
right?
speaking of that, I'll tell a story. I was getting a little kind of ready to do something else other than FP&A. Kind of change. I remember mentioning a boss. I always thought product was interesting. I knew our product marketing team. And I had commented one day to him, I've thought about moving into the product team. That'd be kind of fun. And basically he's like, nope, not happening here. Like, you're too valuable. And it was kind of a compliment, but at the same time, like, really? Because I think it would have been kind of fun to have that new challenge and to do something different. Not that I didn't like FP&A, but I think like all of us, we have times when we want to do something different. Maybe the candle just isn't burning as bright. Maybe we need a new challenge, whether it's a company, whether it's a role, whatever it might be, right? There's nothing wrong with switching careers, even if you're passionate, if you feel like it's time for a change.
Yeah, it's cool. Your story is cool. And it reminded me, I was sitting in a meeting, okay? Finance director a few years ago, maybe 11 years ago. And me and my peers were on the finance leadership team. And the CFO looks at us and she goes, the person who's leading a course called Cash College, teaching cash to 200 people, just went on sick leave. She's like, who wants to lead it? And it wasn't one of those awkward moments where everybody's looking away. Something in me just said, let's go. And I put my hand up. The best career experience I've ever had. Probably the hardest experience I also had as well. So I had to go interview universities, develop a curriculum, say, how the heck am I going to engage sales and marketing folks for 2 days, teaching them about the cash conversion cycle, things like that. But it was a really cool lesson to say, volunteer for things that maybe are in that interest zone, even if they're hard. And that experience in itself, the confidence I built because I went all in, was probably the reason I had the confidence as well to start my own business and to teach.
Well, I appreciate that. And so let's just kind of recap. The 4 things were, again, if you could just run through those. I know we have burning your bridges, others. I don't think we have. So that's what I wanted.
Yeah, fantastic. And I don't think we've gone to step 4. So I'll go to step 4. So step 1, find your purpose, find what you're more energetic towards, think about that. Step 2 is build your bridge to start doing more of what you love. Step 3 is burn the bolts, where you go all in. And step 4 is flex your muscle. So in other words, when you first start, it's okay. I had a vision of, I just want to do storytelling for finance, teach communication skills and thought. My client then says, hey, can you teach Excel? And I was like, I can, but it's going to be bad. So let me find somebody who could do it at a world-class level. And I asked you when you did it. So flexing my muscles in this case became, okay, in order to sustain a business, I need to offer more than one course. How do I do it? Then I was asked to facilitate leadership training sessions. Okay, that's another potential part of my business. Now I'm facilitating CEO meetings. So again, what I've tried to do is say, what are the things I still love to do that are in that wheelhouse, right? And same thing with you. Like you started a podcast and you working with vendors and you were building a newsletter. So flexing your muscles, being open to change, adapting to change, and thriving during change. Okay, so those are the 4 steps.
Got it. And any kind of tips or things you found as you're going through the 4 steps that people should watch out for? Like, hey, be aware of this, or these are things that often people struggle with.
Yeah. So what I would say is, let's say you're an FP&A person in a role. You got a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 role, whatever that role is.
In my case, it's 4 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would say, pay attention to your energy as you go through the week, right? And same thing we do when you said, look, there's parts of our entrepreneurial job that are not the most fun. So pay attention to the things you just feel like you're in flow, you have energy towards, your time is passing by fast. And that's a massive clue to the thing that you actually enjoy doing. Sometimes we just do stuff unconsciously because we've done it for so many years. That's the first thing I would say, and try to do more of that. The second is, I interviewed 20 people at the back of the book. They're called Monday Mavericks. You're one of them. I truly tried to find people who love what they did in very different disciplines. CEOs, FP&A individuals. Many of them actually had a finance and FP&A background to start with. So it's pretty cool to see that. But a couple of things came through. One is they thought back to what did they love to do when they were young? Okay. And I think you always liked math and things like that. Like, when I reflected on that. So one is there was something they loved to do as a child. Life has taken over and has pushed them in so many different directions. We don't even know, life has a lot of ways to do that. So it's reflecting on what gives you joy. And many of them, like when they came back to that, it started bringing more joy. The second is surrounding yourself with people who are uplifters, right? To say it is possible. So when I first started my business, many people told me, what the F are you doing? Like, you've got a secure job, you're getting a lot of pay and blah, blah, blah. I had a lot of other people who encouraged me, right? So find the circle. They say you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. I know it's a saying, it's not exactly true, but we do get a lot from our network. So I think the network's really important. And then I think it's back to what we're talking about, networking, just being open to ask for help, right? And a big part of me was asking somebody to coach me because I'd never gone through it. And you've introduced me to so many people. The reason I wrote the book is Asif Masani, who's a big influencer like you, was writing a book. So I started believing it's possible, and he introduced me to the publisher, right? So there's many different things, but a lot of it is just being bold and saying, I'm going to take charge of my life, and here's what I'm going to do about it.
FP&A Guy here, and I want to tell you about the Planning and BI Showcase. Gone are the days of juggling multiple platforms. Now with business intelligence tools, you can integrate planning directly into your BI system, the same system your entire company already uses. Join me on March 20th for the Planning and BI Showcase, where industry leaders will demonstrate how top BI tools are reshaping strategic planning. See firsthand how modern FP&A solutions can drive real value across your enterprise. The event features live demos from leading BI solutions. Whether you're a CFO or an FP&A professional, you'll discover the tools that can help you deliver more value across your enterprise. Don't miss out. Register today at www.excelevents.com/e/planning.in.bi.showcase and take the first step towards smarter, data-driven decision-making. I like what you said about taking charge and doing it. And I think it's interesting how you mentioned, a lot of them went back to what they did as a child. I've always liked numbers, statistics, sports. And funny enough, I always enjoyed arguing as a kid. I know that shocks you. I knew you'd laugh if I said that. So I always thought I was going to be a lawyer when I grew up. But as I got older, I realized, no, I don't want to be a lawyer. But when I was going to say, what did you want to be as a kid? Like, did you like teaching when you were a kid? I mentioned you were very shy and kind of scared. So what were, outside of
Yeah,
soccer, you love
you
soccer,
know
what were
what's
your passions?
what's interesting is, so I wanted to be a soccer player.
Yeah, I knew that.
So at my age, my young age that I am, I don't think I could do that anymore. But I always loved the team aspect within a sport or within work or things like that. So I'd always wanted to be that coach, be that leader. And I think this job affords us to do that. And then, as I think about, like, whenever somebody needed help, I would love to teach them and help them, whether it's a peer in grade 3 in math or, now I'd be like, hey, I'd love to sit down with you. And, I would do that for my friends at work. They'd start and they'd have a financial responsibility, let's say marketing or sales, and they didn't understand the P&L. I'd be like, I'd love to sit down with you and walk you through it. Where other peers for me would be like, why do I have to do that? So again, there's so many different clues at different stages to say, what do we love to do?
Yeah, no, it's a great point that there's a lot of clues at different stages. And the reality is, like you went back at the beginning, it's about what you love to do and what you could be paid for. If you love something that isn't going to pay anything, it's really hard to turn that into a career. So I think there's an aspect to this of just being realistic and being honest in that assessment. What
Yeah.
would you say to that?
And so I agree with that 100% to say, okay, yes, like we got to find something that we get paid for. But what I think we both learned is, if you go in for the money's not going to be as great and the fulfillment's not going to be as great. Now, I'll give you an example. When I first started, I needed to get paid. I'd do anything to get paid. So I wrote articles on subjects that I didn't like. It was like pulling teeth. I did it and I needed to do it to get paid, but I didn't love it. So if I did more and more of that, I would start to love my Mondays less. So it's about finding things that you do for the love of it, but also pay, right? And going in not for the money, going in for the joy of doing it. Like, so me and you have done so many free webinars and training sessions. You do this Excel thing every week on LinkedIn Live. You probably enjoy it. It's a lot of work, I'm sure, but it's back to, like, money's important, but don't do it for money. You know what
Yeah. Well, I still remember I had an opportunity one time where I had been offered an extremely good package, really good money. And that next year I would have probably doubled what I was making. And I was, seriously considering it. My wife said, you really need to take the new opportunity. You're not happy where you're at anymore. Like, you're not happy there. Why would you consider this? And it was just that reminder, when you're making decisions, it's not about money. Because at the end of the day, if it's just about money, at some point, that's not enough. That could be enough for a while. We could all do certain things for money. But at the end of the day, money isn't happiness.
Yeah, Paul, you reminded me of a story, and I'm going to try and tell it on the fly. I don't think I've ever told this story. So let's say we got Paul Barnhurst. I won't use it. Me and you, we get a training session in Hawaii, and we see this person on the beach barbecuing the fish. Okay. And I go to the person and I say, oh, wow, what is that? And it's tuna or something like that. I'm like, man, that's good. Why don't we go into business and build a factory? And he goes, why would I do that? And so we're like, okay, so when we're going to make a lot of money and we're going to expand it everywhere. And anyway, the story goes on for a bit and it builds. And then then that person on the beach says, so are we doing all this? And the guy goes, oh, so we can sit on the beach to go back, right? So sometimes we just get caught in this corporate ladder of money and all that. But the moral of the story is that fellow was sitting on the beach, enjoying his life. And you do all these things until retirement in order to sit back on that beach. So sometimes it's thinking about, are we doing things we love? Right. And the story is probably way better told, but I think you get the moral of the story I'm talking about, right?
Wait, there's a moral to that story? No,
Always
I totally get what you're saying. Sometimes we're right where we want to be and we don't even realize it because we're so focused on other things.
Yeah, and it reminded me, one of the other things you asked me the question, what were some common elements in people who loved Mondays? Gratitude. And for example, Jim Ailing, who's the ex-president of Starbucks, he's COO of T-Mobile, CEO of Tom Shoes. He talked about the biggest turning point in his life was when him and his family every night would say, what are the 3 things they were grateful for that day? And, Oprah has gratitude journals. It was a pretty cool thing for me to interview all 20, including you, and say, one thing, they're genuinely happy and grateful, even though many of them have big challenges in their lives.
Yeah, it's really funny. It goes back to attitude, right? I've heard it said an attitude of gratitude. And I think gratitude has a lot to do with your attitude. There's a correlation. And a big part of being happy isn't, the job we have, isn't the situation we're in. It's how we choose to approach things. Doesn't mean we shouldn't search for the passion. Doesn't mean we don't want to be happy in our job. But we can control a lot of it by just our attitude and being grateful and looking for the positive things in life, regardless of what role we're in and whether it's 2 a.m. and we're yelling, plug it, or whatever it might be. Because I've been there too. Where the boss is just like, just plug it. I'm done. I'm like, yeah, it's midnight. I can't even think anymore. Just stick a number in there and we'll deal with it later.
Yeah. And one of the things I've learned is to reframe things, right? And one of my mentors, Ann Gomez, who's amazing, and she has a training business. She always says, instead of saying I have to, she consciously says I get to, right? So for me, before we went live, so to speak, you were asking me, hey, what was it like? And I was like, oh, I landed for Vancouver at 10 p.m. and I had to take my wife to the airport at 3 a.m. And at 7 a.m. I was downtown again. And we both had a good chuckle, and I said, but we're not complaining. That's what we want to do. I got to go to Vancouver. It's not like I have to. I got to do 2 keynote speeches on Sunday, not like I had to, right? And that's a practice. It's practicing that. So when I find myself tilting to negative, okay, what can I appreciate about that?
Well, it's funny as you said that, it made me realize earlier today, I was thinking, because 2 days ago I had no podcast on the calendar today. And this morning I was thinking, I have to do, a couple podcasts. Like, there goes all my time. And just you mentioning that reminded me, it's like, I get to, like, this is fun. I enjoy doing it. Now, are there other things that I'll have to figure out at a later time when I'm going to do them? Sure.
Yes.
And that's more of but just have that positive attitude. I get to do something I love because I love doing podcasting. Or the other one, so many people, I could never be good at Excel or storytelling or whatever it may be in FP&A that they want to be good at. Visualizations, right? We've all heard them. Business partnering, communicating. And I love your reframing. We talk about the growth mindset. Andweck, great book, is I'm not good yet, or I haven't mastered that yet, or I haven't learned that about Excel yet. It's just that little framing says, I'll get there. And the reality is 99% of the time we can. Am I ever going to be Michael Jordan? No. That ship has sailed, right? Are you ever going to be the greatest soccer player in the world? No. There are certain things we're just not going to be able to do, either genetics, time, whatever. But generally, if we're willing to frame it right and put in the time, we can do virtually anything we want to within reason.
Yeah, it's funny. I was sitting around a table yesterday facilitating a group of executives. And there's a CFO who's actually pretty well spoken. And he made the statement, I'm not good at public speaking. And you know what I do when I hear that type of stuff. I always say, put the word yet at the end of it. Because if you make a definitive statement like I'm not good at public speaking, you basically seal the deal. If you put the word yet, it's telling your brain, yes, it is possible, right? And what's been cool about working with you is 3 years ago, your soft skills were probably average. Now they're top of the charts, right? Because you've invested in it. My technical skills were bottom of the chart. And now I can do an X lookup, and I can use unique, and I can use all these things that I've been exposed to watching you. And my skills have gone up a little. It's not frankly a big interest of mine, but I've gotten a lot better because now I believe it's possible. I sat there and I was like, why would I go from V lookup to X lookup? But having watched you do it 4 times, sometimes like, okay, Paul, I'm going to follow along with you. I learned it. So it's being open to it. So Carol Dweck's book and podcast is phenomenal in terms of teaching that story.
Well, I think we're probably about time for this. So what I'd love to do is just get your last thoughts you want to share, something about the book, FP&A, just up to you where you'd like to take it. But just take a minute and some last thoughts before you wrap
so
up.
I'd say my last thought is, when you write a book, it can be a pretty overwhelming project. There's many times I didn't believe I could do it. And what I did was I said, I'm going to write for 30 minutes every day. So I'd say advice to listeners is if there's something you're going after and maybe it feels big, what's the one step towards it? What's that one step? What's that one commitment every day? So I think to me, that would be pretty cool. And then the other thing is I'm really proud of, I'm honored to have you write the forward, but I'm also so proud to have Adina Samuels, who was my editor, write it because, I really feel like it takes a team, and she took that so seriously. When I first talked to her, she said it's a dream to edit a book. She was working weekends, nights. She pulled what I would say is my average writing to what I'm really proud of. And I would say if anyone's interested, look, the book's on Amazon. I'm really proud of this book. And my goal for writing is to help change people's lives because my life got changed and many people helped get there.
Right.
And
We'll grab the book and hold it up so we can see it.
Yeah. So you can see it over there. And here's what it looks like. So it's bright yellow, Love Mondays. And if you're not a book reader, hopefully this podcast would help. But it really is around how do we be more intentional, find the right people to surround yourself with, and love Mondays and every other day.
I only love Mondays if I'm making a lot of money so I can sit on the beach, not catching that fish.
Hopefully in time, Paul. Hopefully in time.
No, I really like that story. I enjoyed chatting today. And just, if anyone's listening to this and they want to learn more about Ron, you can find him on LinkedIn. I know you have a website for your book as well, right?
Yeah, it's lovemondaysbook.com.
I love Mondays.
Okay, and maybe I'll send it to you and we can put it in the show notes.
We'll definitely add that to the show notes. So again, thank you for joining me. It was great to chat. Hope our audience enjoys the conversation as much as I did. So thanks for carving out some time, Ron.
Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to FP&A Tomorrow. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review on your podcast platform of choice. This allows us to continue to bring you great guests from around the globe. As a reminder, you can earn CPE credit by going to earmarkcpe.com, downloading the app, taking a short quiz, and getting your CPE certificate. To earn continuing education credits for the FPAC certification, take the quiz on Earmark and contact me, the show host, for further details.